Well, my name's John Richard Clough. I was aware of Black Dyke a long time before I joined. I mean, they did an hat-trick 1947, 8 and 9. And Bradford is a rugby city, and we had Bradford Northern at the time. And Bradford Northern won the Rugby League Challenge Cup 47, 48 and 49. And I can remember at Congregational Church I was attached to when I was younger. And one at elders there remarked that Bradford Northern had won the cup and Black Dyke had won the cup, and that's how I knew it were. I was brought up one night to listen to a band by Elizabeth Lum, who started Highfield School Band, and her and her husband went on to help to run the National Youth Brass Band. Mrs. Pete, they called her. Don't you remember her? Not? Anyway, and she brought me up one night. Billy Lang was top man. I don't know about Euphonium, whether it was Denzel or whether it was Jeffrey, I'm not right sure. But she brought me up. And I never came up again until just before I joined. And I did my national service in 1955. I went into army. And I've been playing principal cornet with Bradford Victoria. I was still playing principal cornet. I was stationed at Catterick, so I was home most weekends. Anyway, beginning of 1957, I went to Germany. And I got a letter from Jack Emmett, bandmaster Black Dyke Band. Would I like to join when I got demobbed? Now, Jack Emmett, there were 5 members of, including myself, there were 5 members of Black Dyke Band that had been in the 5th Royal Enniskillen Dragoon Guards. Peter Lambert was the band president, he was a captain. Eric Bland had been in 5th Royal Enniskillens, David Pratt, and what other one? There was another one. It'll come back to me, I'm getting old. But there we are. Jack Emmett. And I think I wrote, when I came back home, I thought, I've had Bradford Victoria's cornet. I've taken it to Germany. I can hardly go back and say, look, I'm leaving. So I didn't. And then a few months after, I got somebody contacted me from Brighouse and Rastrick. Would I like to go and audition for principal cornet? Well, of course I did. I went down to Brighouse and Rastrick, Willie Wood were there, and I was accepted as principal cornet with Brighouse and Rastrick. And then I turned them down. And I got home and I thought, well, 2 bands I've always wanted to play with, and in the last few months I've turned them both down. In 1959, Black Dyke won Albert Hall on Loire Dix. Marvellous performance, I was listening to it. And then the year after, they were doing the new music for brass at the Royal Festival Hall. Somebody used to come, there were composers' contests, and they whittled it down to 5, and then they put it on Albert Hall. So I thought, I'll have a ride up and listen. I knew Harry Mortimer were up. So I came in, I stood up back there, and I'm counting round. That's 24. You're allowed 25 in a band. Now, I didn't know that you weren't allowed to miss at Black Dyke. I soon found out, like. But anyway, and so I thought, there's a vacancy. So I asked Jack Emmett that night, and anyway, to cut a long story short, I came up for audition. I sat principal cornet one night. Morris wasn't there, so I had to come again, and I was accepted in the band. And that was about 6 weeks before the Albert Hall in 1960. And I was actually going to play 5th Man Down. What did I play on that one? We were a 3rd cornet player short. So I went and played 3rd cornet. I sat outside of the great Owen Bottomley, it used to be principal cornet on that one. And then I went back up 5th Man Down. And we did a job up in North Yorkshire, and I was 5th man down. Maurice Murphy was top man, I was 5th man. And Billy Gibson was at side of me on 4th man. We played afternoon concert, and then we went back to Diggs for as tea, and Billy says, just keep it quiet a bit. I said, what do you mean? He said, look, they know you can play, else you won't be a bloody band. He said, but it's been murder this afternoon. He said, Morris has been leading at one end, you've been leading at this other end. So anyway, shortly after that, we had a bit of a reshuffle before we went to Albert Hall in '61. There were Wilf Kershaw on double bass, he'd been a plasterer and he couldn't breathe. His lungs must have been full of plaster or something. So 4 or 5 weeks before Albert Hall, we were a double bass shop. Harry Pickering, he were on second baritone. He said, well, I'd like to have a go at double B. So they put him on double B. So they said, now we need a second baritone. Everybody looked at me. So I finished up on second baritone for the 1961 contest, which starts with the second baritone solo, and I actually did it, even though it is one note, you know. And I said, well, I don't want to stop on it too long. No, well, we'll have to record it. You know, we'll have to record a test piece. Anyway, I was still on second baritone year after. And then in the November, we went to the Lord Mayor's show. It must have been something to do with Clough, so Foster sent the band down. So I went back on cornet. And then I stayed on cornet. I went on Repiana, which I really enjoyed then. And then we went to Bellevue in 1963 on Life Divine. So I managed to play that infamous solo, you know. And then, did we have holiday? I forget now. Anyway, I came back after a week. There's a young lad sat on my seat. So I walked over to him. I said, what are you doing here? He said, I'm a piano player. I said, oh, are you? I said, I was before I went on my holidays, you know. So anyway, and then Jeffrey goes, I went over and said, what's up? I said, what's happening here? He said, we want you to go on front row on third man down. I said, I don't want to go on third man down. He said, well, it's not to do with what you want. We want you on third man down. He said, and then before too long, we want you to move up and bump up to Jim, you see. So I said, I like that. Then, of course, we know Euphonium player. We've been borrowing Euphonium players. And Charlie Emmett, who were on bass, we'd had Harry Mather, a lad from Grimethorpe. They offered it to them, but nobody else. And we couldn't get a Euphonium player. So Charlie Emmett says, and bearing in mind I'd never played Euphonium in my life, I'd never even blown one, he said, I think John Clough would make a good Euphonium player. And David Pratt on second man, who knew I would after his seat, he seconded it, you see. Gordon Sutcliffe were on solo on. No, it won't work. You can't take somebody from Cornet and put them on Euphonium. Anyway, Gordon were outvoted. And on beginning of January 1964, they had an old Euphonium done up for me, and I went on Euphonium. And up to area contest, every concert we did, I sat third Euphonium. We had a borrowed one. Brian Brobrent sat second, and I sat third to get used to it. You know? Anyway, I came to area contest, symphony marches, and I had to move up. Anyway, one area. We went to London. We didn't go to Bellevue that year. We played Variations on a Ninth, which is a big Euphonium part. There's a cadenza, a recit, and a solo. It's a nice piece, really. And I played this. I can't remember much about it. And we were behind. The format was horns, Euphonium, baritone, basses that way. And Jiggs were conducting. And then when Jiggs stood up taking a bow, Gordon Sutcliffe stood up, you see. And I'm thinking, he were against me going on it in the first place. I thought, where's Gordon going, you know? And in front of a packed Albert Hall, he turned round, offered me his hand, nodded his head. He'd accepted me. And he never said anything against me for as long as he lived. And I were it band then. I'd done it. I was there. When I went on Euphonium, when Charlie proposed it, you see, I said, so Whittam says, well, what about it? I says, all right then, I'll have a go. He says, we don't want somebody who's going to have a go. He said, we want somebody that's going to do it. I says, okay then, I'll bloody do it. And I was there for 25 years, just short, and they never told me I got a job. I were never told I'd been accepted as solo Euphonium, and I just kept turning up week by week and for the next 25 years. Well, there's so many really, and some come to hand straight away. There's some of them at performance at Albert Hall. My favourite piece is Eric Ball's Wayfarer. I thought it a wonderful piece. And I mean, we've had trips to Australia and Japan and America. There's been so many highlights. The worst performance I ever gave was in Sydney Opera House, and I dried up, and I was fighting the damn thing. Whether it was jet lag or change of water, I don't know, because it never bothered me. And I couldn't. I struggled to finish the solo, and I sat down, and I didn't play an encore. And then a couple of days later, we were down in one of these hula-gong things, you know, Wollongong, I think it was, and I had no problem at all. That was the worst performance. I just managed to get through it, that were all. So, but there's been so many highlights, yeah. I can't really. It was just a highlight being in Black Dyke Band. I go on my holidays, when kids were younger, Butlins, and I'm sat there, you know, with my Black Dyke blazer on, and my badge. Sandy Smith once says to me, "Don't you ever wear it out else?" I says, "No, I wear this everywhere," you know. So, no, it's very difficult to pick anything out, really. Well, I thought it was wonderful, and I used to tell him that we made him famous. But somebody else might have told you a story how we got the job. We wanted a conductor in 1967, and we went to Royal Festival Hall to play. And they offered us a broadcast as well. And Geoffrey Brand, he must have been in charge, and he said, "Well, there's a broadcast, but I have to do it," you know. So anyway, we all thought it was marvellous. And going back to the hotel at night, Roy came round bus, Roy News, and he says, "What do you think?" Marvellous, marvellous. So they set him on. And then we won in 67, you know, later, a few months later, we won Albert Hall, so there it were made. But he was a great fella. He knew just how to treat people, he knew how to get the best out of you, he knew when to kick ass, if you like, and he was wonderful. And of course I started under Major Wilcox. You had to have clean shoes, when he walked in, the whole ambience of the place, you could tell it come. Even if you didn't see him, he was wonderful. We played area contest in 1961, and we were at last band. We came back up here, we all sat around, and he started talking about his army career. Never bothered about preludes or, you know, contest piece. And then he just looked at his watch and said, "I think we better go to the St George's Hall now." So we got on the bus, went down there. When we got down there, the contests were over virtually because Hargreaves were at box, and he'd already finished. You know, we were late getting there. We got on stage, and whoever MC said, "Mr. Adjudicator, there's another band." And yeah, a few years later, I was with Walter's company, and he'd already given, I think, a big Brighouse out at first, you see. Nobody's going to beat that. And then he says, this note came. Whew, he said, I nearly jumped off my seat. And he said, "You'd won that contest. You played one note, first, and I wrote first prize. Gentlemen, who am I to criticise?" And we won a contest on first note. And that came from Judge, not from any hearsay or anything. When I was sat with him in a pub having a drink a few years later. Jim must have got restless feet. I don't know. In his interview, he might tell you why he did it. Why it came to a head, I think, is because we'd voted not to go to the mass bands at the Royal Albert Hall in '73, and then we found out later that, and Jim voted against it. You see, whether we wanted to go or not, it didn't really matter. And then we found out Jim had formed this versatile brass. He'd been asked to perform at Albert Hall, and they said yes. And there were 5 or 6, he took 5 or 6 players with him. And we couldn't accept it. I think that's why it blew up. And Peter Lambert asked him to go in, and, you know, he said, he told Jim, it's either Versatile Brass or Black Dyke. And he chose Black Dyke, so. And then we got Philip, and a few weeks later we went to Bellevue and won Bellevue. So we got second in London, and then we did a hat-trick in London, so it bounced back very quickly. Well, to me, I mean, it was just up there. It got too big. For me, really, it got too big. It got bigger than my job. It got bigger than anything. You know, as long as I could get to band, it suppose it didn't really matter, which is, you're looking back, and Black Dyke had to win. We had, we'd always to play well, and second were no good. And I went up once for trophy, and we got second, which disappointed me. And this bloke said, "Congratulations, well played," and I just said it wasn't well enough for it. I couldn't accept second. So there we are, in anything to do with Black Dyke Band. When it was Black Dyke Mills Band, you see, I never played with Black Dyke Band, did I? And when it was Black Dyke Mills Band, and then textile industry were falling around everybody's ears in Bradford. When I were young, there were a mill on every corner, and they were getting less and less and less. Foster's used to have, I understand, sheep farms in Australia and New Zealand. They produced their own sheep, if you like, and wool came over from there. And they were getting less and less. They were buying other firms' order books. And at one time I thought, I wouldn't like to see Black Dyke floundering like Bessers of the Barn or, become a first section band. I would rather Foster's say, "We can't continue anymore, stop the band." They didn't, and the present committee or whoever it is that's running it, they seem to be doing very well, and obviously it's got a good future now, as long as they keep a good band, because all this paraphernalia is history. It's the people that turn up today that's the future of Black Dyke Band, as far as I'm concerned. We help to keep it going. We also had a band president, which were a director, and Peter Lambert did it for most of the time, I think all the time I was at band. That's the same Peter Lambert who was in 5th Royal Engineers Guards. And he was very good, the connection was very good. We got new instruments in 1965. They said every band had to go into low pitch, I don't know if you remember it or not. And so we all had extensions put on us tuning slides. We came to rehearsal, noise was diabolical. And this same Gordon Sutcliffe just stopped playing, Jeffrey stopped conducting, he took his extensions out, he threw them up floor, and don't forget Gordon worked at the mill. He says, if Foster's want us to go into low pitch, they can buy some new instruments. So it was brought up at a board meeting, and I think it was Ronald Foster at the time, that was chairman. First item on the band, on the board meeting, were new instruments for the band. I understand they never asked how much they were going to cost. Ronald Foster just says, who supplies the band's instruments now? I think it was Reynolds of Manchester. No, it might have been Reynolds of Manchester. He just said, tell them to supply new instruments. So we walked into band room a few weeks later, and there were a brand new instrument on everybody's stand. That one of them. And that's how new instruments came about. But they obviously, if we wanted tunics, uniforms, walking out, blazer or whatever, they just made an extra length of cloth and got somebody to make it. They made the cloth for it, and that was it. They were very good. You see, when John Foster started the band, evidently he said they all said, as long as there's a mill, there's to be a band, and it has to be a good one. And it's up to the directors of the day to make sure it is. These are stories I've heard. I suppose there must be a modicum of truth in it, because they kept it going, and sometimes it was a bit of a damn nuisance, I think, for them, but they had to keep it going. People ask me how many hours a day I used to practice. In fact, they once asked my wife how many hours a day I practice. She says, do you mean hours a year? She says, because he won't get it out at case unless he's being paid for it. I never practiced. Trevor Groom used to tell me doing 2 hours a day. I said, how do you do that, Trevor? He said, I like it. I said, okay, but once I got established, no, I never practiced at all. I just used to come and play it. Well, there's some brilliant players. I mean, Gary's here to go. There's David Child. Is to me, a year or two ago at Albert Hall, when it was that Australian thing, Terrasum, you might not name it, I don't know. And he played Australia Fair. To me, that should have won that contest. with Corey's, it was just, I thought he was an Australian. He was wonderful. And then another time, I think Corey's had one, and there was the top D sharp. I'd listened to every band. I didn't know what a top D sharp, so somebody told me, but every band were hitting it, every Euphonium player hitting it fairly loud, you know. And then chorus came on, David Childs got it quiet, and he dimmed. What an effect. And they won it, and I saw him afterwards. I said, David, never mind all these fancy notes and whatever. I said, what you did on that top note, that takes some doing. And I said, and his dad was there, Bob. I said, actually, David, you did a Clough on that, didn't you? And his father says, yeah, he did. Because it's sort of daft thing I'd do, you know. When we played Usher Hall in Edinburgh, European, 84, refrains and cadenzas. There's a big long cadenza there, and it finishes up. You're on a middle C, you start double piano, and it dims. And I started double piano, and I could play quiet. And I thought, heck, I've got to dim. And I did. And I almost stopped. And adjudicator wrote, phew, what a dim. You know, it could have stopped, but it didn't. I kept, there again, you see, with that small hole in the bottom of that mouthpiece, I have back pressure so you can control easier the flow of wind. But you see, modern mouthpieces have got big holes in them, and it's all altered from me. You know, I don't bother much with banding now at all. And I can't really give any advice to somebody that can play all these fancy notes better than me. And no, it's moved on. Same as, you know, you go back with Owen Bottomley, Billy Lang, and as far as I know, I'm the longest serving euphonium player in Black Dyke Mills Band. There was a chap called Phineas Bauer that was on mid-18s, 1880s or something like that. And he was on about a similar time, but I think he used to play trombone and all. So unless that could be clarified, I'm the longest euphonium player ever in the Black Dyke Mills Band or the Black Dyke Band.